What if everything you thought you knew was holding you back? What if the secret to unlocking your full potential lies not in having all the answers, but in learning to question what you think you know? In today's video, we're uncovering the power of rethinking, how challenging your assumptions and embracing uncertainty can actually make you more successful. If you're ready to rethink your mindset and embrace a whole new way of thinking, this video is for you. Stay with us because the next few minutes could change the way you approach every decision in your life. Chapter 1. A preacher, a prosecutor, a politician, and a scientist walk into your mind. In this opening chapter, we're introduced to 4 powerful mindsets that shape how we think: the preacher, the prosecutor, the politician, and the scientist. Each of these modes represents a different approach to how we engage with our beliefs, argue with others, and navigate the complexities of life. The preacher mindset emerges when we're passionately defending our beliefs. In this mode, we hold tightly to what we know as if our identity depends on it. We are focused on spreading the truth and convincing others to accept it. The goal of the preacher is not to question or rethink, but to protect and uphold the ideals we hold dear. This approach might feel righteous, but it locks us into rigid thinking. When we're stuck in this mindset, there's little room for questioning whether our beliefs might need adjustment. The prosecutor mindset comes into play when we're more focused on proving others wrong than rethinking our own beliefs. In this frame of mind, we're constantly on the attack, seeking out flaws in other people's arguments, eager to win debates. Prosecutors are determined to expose inconsistencies in others while being blind to their own. It's a confrontational way of thinking, where victory matters more than learning or evolving. This aggressive approach might win arguments, but it often leaves little room for collaboration or growth. Then comes the politician mindset, where the focus is on garnering approval and support rather than truth-seeking. When we're in this mode, we're willing to say what others want to hear, to adjust our stance depending on the audience, and to do whatever it takes to maintain power or influence. This might seem strategic, but it leads us to compromise our values or avoid difficult truths altogether. The politician is more concerned with being liked or respected than being right, which can make us susceptible to ignoring critical thinking in favor of popularity or agreement. These 3 modes, preacher, prosecutor, and politician, are all defensive in nature. They center around protecting, defending, and winning rather than learning. They trap us in a cycle of certainty and prevent us from questioning ourselves. But then there's the scientist mindset, which flips this script entirely. The scientist approach is all about curiosity and discovery. When we adopt the scientist mindset, we aren't committed to any particular belief or viewpoint. Instead, we're committed to finding the truth, even if it means abandoning what we once thought was true. Scientists don't preach or prosecute. They hypothesize and test. They thrive on doubt, constantly rethinking and revising their ideas in light of new evidence. This mindset is the key to unlocking true intellectual flexibility and resilience. It allows us to question ourselves and the world around us, leading to greater growth and deeper understanding. What makes the scientist mindset so powerful is that it encourages humility. When we think like a scientist, we don't assume we have all the answers. We're open to learning and willing to adjust our views based on new information. It's a radical departure from the rigidity of the preacher, prosecutor, or politician, and it's an essential tool for navigating an increasingly complex and fast-changing world. This chapter challenges us to think about how often we fall into the trap of the preacher, prosecutor, or politician in our everyday lives. Whether it's in conversations with friends, debates on social media, or even how we think about our own deeply held beliefs, these modes can dominate our thinking without us even realizing it. The preacher seeks to convert, the prosecutor seeks to win, and the politician seeks to please. But none of them seeks to learn. In contrast, the scientist is willing to rethink, revise, and even admit when they're wrong. In essence, this chapter invites us to reframe the way we engage with the world. Instead of clinging to certainty, we are encouraged to embrace doubt and curiosity. When we think like a scientist, we stop seeing disagreements as battles to be won and start seeing them as opportunities to learn something new. We stop seeking approval and start seeking truth. We begin to appreciate the power of not knowing, understanding that the willingness to rethink is not a weakness, but a strength. It's through this mindset that we can unlock creativity, build stronger relationships, and become more adaptable to change. The message here is clear. To live with a mindset of constant rethinking is to live with flexibility and resilience. It's about unlearning outdated ideas and discovering better ones. By shifting into the scientist mode, we don't just sharpen our intellect, we build a more open, agile mind, one that's capable of growth and ready to navigate an uncertain world with grace and wisdom. This chapter sets the stage for the rest of the book, showing us that the power of knowing what you don't know is the key to rethinking everything from our personal beliefs to the way we interact with others. It's a call to action for all of us to become more thoughtful, humble, and curious, traits that will serve us far better in the long run than stubborn certainty ever could. Chapter 2. The Armchair Quarterback and the Imposter, Finding the Sweet Spot of Confidence. In this chapter, we delve into the delicate balance between confidence and humility, two traits that often pull us in opposite directions. We're introduced to two characters who represent extremes on the confidence spectrum, the armchair quarterback and the imposter. These archetypes help illustrate the pitfalls of too much or too little confidence and the importance of finding the sweet spot in between, where growth and success truly happen. The armchair quarterback represents the danger of overconfidence. This person is someone who, without ever having been on the field, confidently asserts how the game should be played, convinced they know best despite their lack of experience or expertise. In everyday life, we all know people like this, those who loudly express opinions on topics they know little about, unaware of their own ignorance. The armchair quarterback operates with what psychologists call armchair knowledge, which gives them the illusion of expertise without the substance to back it up. This overconfidence blinds them to their own limitations, making them unable or unwilling to rethink their assumptions. The issue with the armchair quarterback mindset is that it leads to a false sense of certainty. People with this mentality are so convinced of their knowledge that they never stop to question it. They may perform well in certain areas, but their refusal to acknowledge their blind spots keeps them from ever improving. In their rush to act, they skip the critical step of reconsidering their assumptions. This kind of arrogance can lead to big mistakes, as they fail to see the holes in their own reasoning. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the imposter. The imposter suffers from the opposite problem, an intense lack of confidence. Despite their accomplishments, they live in constant fear of being exposed as a fraud. They feel as though they don't belong, even when they have the qualifications and skills to back up their success. The imposter struggles with self-doubt, always questioning whether they're truly deserving of their achievements. This mindset can be paralyzing, leading them to hesitate, second-guess themselves, and sometimes miss out on opportunities because they don't believe in their own abilities. Interestingly, the imposter and the armchair quarterback can both fall prey to a concept known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. This cognitive bias causes people with low ability to overestimate their competence, the armchair quarterback, and those with high ability to underestimate theirs, the imposter. The result is that people who know the least are often the most confident, while those who know the most tend to doubt themselves. Finding the balance between these two extremes is crucial. Too much confidence can lead to arrogance and stagnation, while too little can prevent us from stepping up and seizing new opportunities. The key lies in achieving a healthy mix of confidence and humility. We need enough confidence to take action, but enough humility to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and that we can always improve. The concept of confident humility emerges as the ideal middle ground. Confident humility isn't about self-deprecation or constantly questioning yourself. It's about being secure enough in your abilities to take action while remaining open to feedback, learning, and change. It's knowing what you know, but more importantly, knowing what you don't know. This mindset allows us to stay grounded, avoid the traps of arrogance, and remain open to growth. In this chapter, we also learn about the power of rethinking. People who exhibit confident humility are more willing to rethink their assumptions, admit when they're wrong, and seek out new information. They don't cling to their beliefs out of fear of looking weak or indecisive. Instead, they view rethinking as a strength, a sign of intelligence and adaptability. To illustrate this, the chapter provides real-world examples of successful people who have mastered this mindset. We see how high-performing individuals, from CEOs to athletes, constantly revisit their decisions and strategies. They're not afraid to pivot, to admit when something isn't working, and to seek advice from others who may know more than they do. In contrast to the armchair quarterback, who clings to their opinions no matter what, these individuals thrive by staying curious, staying open to learning, and being willing to question their own ideas. The chapter also addresses a key barrier to rethinking: cognitive entrenchment. This occurs when people become so deeply invested in their beliefs or expertise that they resist change, even in the face of new evidence. Cognitive entrenchment can happen to anyone, but it's particularly common in experts who have spent years mastering a field. They can become so accustomed to relying on their knowledge that they stop updating it. In contrast, those who embrace confident humility are constantly refining their knowledge, seeing it as a dynamic, ever-evolving process. One of the most powerful takeaways from this chapter is the idea that we don't have to choose between confidence and humility. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, when combined, they can become a powerful tool for personal and professional growth. We need enough confidence to take risks and pursue our goals, but we also need enough humility to recognize our limitations, ask for help, and continuously improve. Ultimately, the chapter invites us to rethink our own relationship with confidence. Are we more like the armchair quarterback, too quick to assert opinions without enough knowledge? Or do we fall into the trap of the imposter, constantly doubting our abilities despite evidence to the contrary? Wherever we fall on the spectrum, the goal is to find that sweet spot where we can move forward with confidence, but remain flexible and open to change. This chapter challenges us to reflect on our own mindset. It's a call to balance ambition with curiosity, to embrace confident humility, and to recognize that true wisdom lies not in knowing it all, but in being willing to question what we think we know. By finding this balance, we can unlock our full potential and continue growing, no matter where we are in life. Chapter 3: The Joy of Being Wrong, the Thrill of Not Believing Everything You Think. In this chapter, we're invited to shift our mindset about being wrong. Instead of fearing mistakes, we learn to find joy in them. It's an unusual concept in a world where we're taught to avoid failure and hold on to our beliefs as tightly as possible. But this chapter highlights a liberating truth. There is a real thrill in being wrong. When we stop clinging to certainty and open ourselves up to the idea that we might be wrong, we create space for learning, growth, and discovery. The chapter begins by explaining why most people are so uncomfortable with the idea of being wrong. It's rooted in our desire for consistency and control. From a young age, we are conditioned to equate being right with being competent, intelligent, and successful. When we're wrong, it feels like an attack on our identity, shaking the foundation of how we see ourselves. As a result, many of us build walls of certainty around our beliefs, even when evidence suggests those walls might be crumbling. The fear of being wrong keeps us from rethinking, and in turn, from evolving. However, there is power in flipping that fear on its head and seeing the beauty in error. Mistakes and wrong assumptions aren't signs of weakness, they're opportunities for growth. When we allow ourselves to embrace the idea that we don't have all the answers, we can approach life with a mindset of curiosity and learning. This is where the joy of being wrong comes into play. It's not about celebrating failure for failure's sake, but about appreciating that mistakes are stepping stones to deeper insight and innovation. The chapter introduces the idea of cognitive flexibility, which is our ability to adapt our thinking in light of new information. Cognitive flexibility allows us to move beyond rigid thinking and embrace the uncertainty that comes with growth. When we're cognitively flexible, we're not afraid to challenge our own assumptions, and we're open to the possibility that what we currently believe might be flawed. It's the opposite of cognitive entrenchment, where we dig our heels in, clinging to our current beliefs even when they no longer serve us. A fascinating example provided in the chapter is the story of scientists who make groundbreaking discoveries not by being right from the start, but by revising their beliefs after being wrong. In fact, some of the greatest innovations in history came from people who initially got things wrong, but had the humility and cognitive flexibility to adjust their thinking. The joy of being wrong lies in this. It signals that we're on the verge of learning something new. One key takeaway from the chapter is the concept of productive failure. Not all failures are equal. There's a difference between unproductive failure, where we make mistakes but don't learn from them, and productive failure, where we take the time to reflect on what went wrong and use it as a springboard for improvement. People who embrace the joy of being wrong are more likely to experience productive failure. They're willing to experiment, make mistakes, and, most importantly, learn from them. This mindset fosters creativity and innovation because it encourages us to see failure as part of the process, not the end of it. The chapter also addresses how we can develop a healthier relationship with being wrong in our everyday lives. It starts by changing the way we respond to challenges or contradictions. Instead of going on the defensive or doubling down on our beliefs, we should pause and consider the possibility that we might need to rethink. This shift in approach helps us view opposing viewpoints not as threats, but as opportunities to refine our thinking. Interestingly, this chapter touches on the role of emotions in how we handle being wrong. Many of us experience shame or embarrassment when we're wrong because we tie our self-worth to always being right. But the more we can separate our beliefs from our identity, the easier it becomes to acknowledge our errors without feeling diminished by them. By cultivating a sense of intellectual humility, we can view mistakes as natural parts of the learning process, rather than personal failures. In practical terms, the chapter suggests asking ourselves a simple but powerful question. What if I'm wrong? This question helps us get comfortable with uncertainty and opens the door to rethinking. When we approach debates, discussions, or even our own inner thoughts with this mindset, we become more open to learning. It transforms conflict into a collaborative search for truth, rather than a battle to prove who's right. Another important aspect of the chapter is the idea of learning to enjoy intellectual humility. There's a misconception that humility is about putting yourself down or being passive, but that's far from the truth. Intellectual humility is the ability to be confident in your strengths while recognizing that your knowledge is always incomplete. It's the realization that being wrong today doesn't make you a lesser person. It makes you more open to being right tomorrow. It's in this humility that we find the thrill of rethinking, of not believing everything we think, and of questioning our assumptions in a way that leads to growth. The chapter provides a compelling call to action. Embrace the discomfort of being wrong. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, recognize it as an integral part of learning and evolving. The thrill of not believing everything you think lies in the freedom it brings. When you're not bound by rigid beliefs, you're free to explore new ideas, take in fresh perspectives, and continuously upgrade your thinking. The joy of being wrong, in essence, is about reframing the way we see error and uncertainty. It's about cultivating a mindset that sees mistakes not as setbacks, but as vital parts of the journey toward better understanding and greater wisdom. By embracing the unknown and celebrating the opportunity to rethink, we can become more adaptable, resilient, and creative in every aspect of our lives. In this chapter, we learn that real strength doesn't come from always being right. It comes from being willing to question ourselves, embrace new information, and find joy in the process of growth. When we let go of the need for certainty, we unlock the true power of rethinking. And that's where the thrill of life really begins. Chapter 4. The Good Fight Club, The Psychology of Constructive Conflict. In this chapter, we dive into the often misunderstood realm of conflict and how it can be a catalyst for growth when handled constructively. Many of us are conditioned to avoid conflict at all costs, believing that it leads to tension, resentment, or relationship breakdowns. However, this chapter challenges that belief, showing that when approached with the right mindset, conflict can be not only healthy, but essential for innovation, better decisions, and deeper relationships. The concept of constructive conflict lies at the heart of this chapter. Constructive conflict isn't about yelling, dominating conversations, or winning an argument. It's about engaging in thoughtful disagreement, where the goal is not to crush your opponent, but to arrive at a better understanding of the issue at hand. This kind of conflict pushes us to rethink our assumptions and opens up the possibility of finding solutions that we might have missed if we stayed in our echo chambers or avoided tough conversations. One of the key points in this chapter is that conflict isn't inherently negative. It's how we engage in it that determines whether it becomes destructive or productive. Destructive conflict tends to be emotional, where the goal is to defeat or belittle the other person. This type of argument quickly spirals into defensiveness, attacks, and a breakdown in communication. In contrast, constructive conflict focuses on the issue rather than the individual. It's about challenging ideas without challenging someone's character, which creates an environment where both parties can learn from each other without feeling attacked or diminished. The chapter introduces the idea of task conflict versus relationship conflict. Task conflict is when we argue over ideas, strategies, or approaches, essentially the work at hand. Relationship conflict, on the other hand, is when the disagreement becomes personal, focusing on the character or personality of the people involved. While task conflict can be productive and lead to better outcomes, relationship conflict is usually destructive and breeds resentment. The challenge is learning to engage in task conflict while keeping emotions in check, so it doesn't devolve into personal attacks. One powerful example in this chapter is the dynamic between successful teams. Research shows that the best performing teams aren't the ones that agree all the time. In fact, the most innovative and effective teams often engage in frequent disagreements, but they do so in a way that's respectful and focused on the task. These teams recognize that dissent is essential for uncovering blind spots, testing ideas, and coming up with better solutions. Instead of avoiding conflict, they lean into it, using it as a tool for collective improvement. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of psychological safety in fostering constructive conflict. Psychological safety refers to an environment where people feel safe to express their opinions, admit mistakes, and challenge the status quo without fear of ridicule or retaliation. When psychological safety is present, people are more willing to engage in honest debates because they know their ideas will be considered on their merit, not dismissed out of hand. In contrast, in environments where psychological safety is lacking, people often hold back their opinions, fearing that they'll be judged or ostracized. One of the most compelling insights in this chapter is the role of emotional intelligence in managing conflict. Emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manage your own emotions while also being aware of others' feelings, is crucial for turning conflict into a productive dialogue. People with high emotional intelligence are better at separating their ego from the issue at hand, allowing them to stay calm and focused on the problem rather than getting caught up in personal defensiveness. They also tend to be better at reading the emotions of others, helping to de-escalate tension and steer conversations toward a constructive outcome. This chapter offers practical strategies for engaging in constructive conflict. One such strategy is learning to argue like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. This approach involves presenting your viewpoint with confidence, but also being willing to genuinely consider the other person's perspective. Too often, we enter arguments with the sole intention of proving ourselves right. But in constructive conflict, the goal should be to learn, not just to win. By listening like you're wrong, you open yourself up to rethinking and discovering new insights, even in the heat of disagreement. Another useful tactic is acknowledging common ground. In the midst of an argument, it's easy to focus only on the points of disagreement, which can make the conflict feel more intense. But by taking a moment to recognize areas of agreement, you can diffuse some of the tension and remind both parties that the ultimate goal is the same: to solve the problem or improve the situation. This doesn't mean you avoid difficult discussions, but it helps frame the conflict as a collaborative effort rather than a battle. The chapter also explores the importance of disagreeing with respect. Disrespect in an argument, such as dismissive comments, interrupting, or condescension, can quickly turn a productive debate into a toxic conflict. Respectful disagreement, on the other hand, creates space for both sides to be heard and considered. It's about valuing the person, even if you don't agree with their ideas. When you disagree respectfully, you're more likely to keep the conversation focused on the issue rather than letting it spiral into personal attacks. Interestingly, this chapter reveals that some of the best relationships, whether personal or professional, are built on the ability to fight well. Healthy conflict strengthens relationships because it builds trust and transparency. When people know they can disagree with you and still be respected, it creates a deeper connection. It shows that the relationship can handle challenges, which ultimately makes it more resilient. Whether in a friendship, a marriage, or a business partnership, learning to have constructive conflict is a key ingredient for long-term success. In the end, this chapter flips our understanding of conflict on its head. Instead of being something to fear or avoid, conflict is revealed as a necessary ingredient for growth. The good fight isn't about beating the other person into submission. It's about engaging with their ideas, testing your own assumptions, and coming out on the other side with a stronger, more refined understanding. Constructive conflict is the path to innovation, deeper relationships, and better decisions. We're encouraged to rethink how we approach disagreements in our own lives, whether in the workplace, at home, or in our communities. The next time we find ourselves in a conflict, we should view it as an opportunity, a chance to learn, to challenge, and to ultimately grow. Chapter 5: Dances with Foes: How to Win Debates and Influence People. In this chapter, we dive into the art of debating and influencing others, not through aggression or overpowering arguments, but by using empathy, openness, and humility. The idea here is that winning debates isn't about crushing your opponent. It's about guiding people toward rethinking their positions, and often, doing so requires a softer touch than we might expect. The first key insight is the importance of approaching debates with curiosity, not combativeness. Most of us tend to enter debates with our defenses up, ready to protect our beliefs and attack the other person's ideas. This defensive posture often leads to entrenchment on both sides, where neither party is willing to listen, let alone rethink their stance. However, when we enter a debate with curiosity instead of certainty, we shift from trying to win to trying to understand. This openness creates an atmosphere where both parties are more willing to engage thoughtfully rather than retreat into their comfort zones of belief. The chapter emphasizes that effective persuasion is less about delivering the perfect argument and more about creating the right conditions for the other person to change their mind. One of the best ways to do this is to listen actively and ask questions rather than immediately countering with your own points. By showing genuine interest in someone else's perspective, you disarm them. They don't feel attacked or dismissed, and this makes them more likely to consider your point of view. This is a powerful psychological insight. People are far more likely to rethink their positions when they don't feel like they're under siege. Another powerful tactic explored in the chapter is the use of complexity. When we argue our points in an overly simplistic manner, it can come across as condescending or overly confident. People tend to resist being told that something is black and white, especially when it contradicts their beliefs. Instead, when you acknowledge the complexity of the issue, it shows intellectual humility. Phrases like, "This is a complicated issue," or "There are multiple ways to look at this," signal that you're not claiming to have all the answers. This, in turn, makes your argument more credible because it respects the other person's intelligence and opens the door for them to reconsider without feeling like they're conceding defeat. The chapter highlights the importance of arguing with empathy. Empathy allows you to understand why the other person believes what they do. And this understanding is key to effectively engaging with their perspective. It's easy to dismiss someone's views when they conflict with our own. But empathy allows us to step into their shoes and see the world through their eyes. This not only helps in making more persuasive arguments, but it also builds rapport, which makes people more receptive to new ideas. Empathy transforms debate from a hostile confrontation into a constructive dialogue. One of the most insightful concepts introduced is the idea of motivational interviewing, a technique borrowed from psychotherapy. In motivational interviewing, rather than directly challenging someone's beliefs, you ask open-ended questions that encourage them to reflect on their own reasons for holding certain views. For example, instead of saying, "You're wrong," you might ask, "What led you to that conclusion?" Or, "How do you think this approach would work in the long run?" These questions invite the person to examine their own thinking, and in doing so, often lead them to recognize inconsistencies or weaknesses in their arguments on their own. This approach is far more effective than simply telling someone they're wrong, which tends to make them dig in even deeper. The chapter also explores the role of emotional intelligence in debates. Winning people over is not just about facts and logic. It's also about managing emotions, both yours and theirs. If someone feels attacked or belittled, no amount of logic will change their mind. But if you can keep the emotional temperature down by staying calm, respectful, and composed, you create a space where reasoned discussion can thrive. Emotional intelligence helps you recognize when someone is becoming defensive, and instead of escalating, you can de-escalate by validating their feelings and steering the conversation back to the facts. A particularly interesting strategy discussed is the less is more principle. When we argue, we tend to think that piling on more reasons will make our case stronger. However, studies show that presenting too many arguments can actually backfire, overwhelming the other person and giving them more material to poke holes in. Instead, it's often more effective to focus on just one or two strong, well-thought-out points. By narrowing the scope of your argument, you not only make it easier for the other person to engage with your ideas, but you also come across as more measured and thoughtful. The chapter goes on to discuss the importance of affirming the other person's autonomy. People are more likely to change their minds when they feel that the decision to rethink is their own. When we try to force someone to change, they tend to resist because it feels like they're losing control. But if you can frame the conversation in a way that allows them to feel like they're making the choice on their own terms, they'll be more open to change. Instead of saying, "You should really think differently about this," try saying, "It's up to you how you want to approach this, but here's something to consider." This gives them the freedom to rethink without feeling coerced. The chapter also introduces the concept of the fool's choice. The fool's choice is the belief that we must either be kind and avoid conflict or be direct and engage in harsh debate. But there's a third, more effective option. We can be direct and respectful at the same time. This approach combines honesty with kindness, ensuring that we don't shy away from difficult conversations, but we handle them in a way that preserves relationships. The fool's choice often traps us in either-or thinking, but the most successful communicators find ways to engage in tough debates without burning bridges. In summary, this chapter redefines what it means to win a debate. Winning isn't about dominating the conversation or proving the other person wrong. It's about opening up a space for rethinking. Through empathy, curiosity, emotional intelligence, and a respect for complexity, we can guide people toward new perspectives without making them feel attacked. The real victory in a debate isn't forcing someone to change their mind in the moment, but planting the seed for them to reconsider later. By embracing these principles, we become more effective communicators, capable of influencing others while fostering meaningful, respectful dialogue. Chapter 6, Bad Blood on the Diamond, Diminishing Prejudice by Destabilizing Stereotypes. This chapter delves into the complex issue of prejudice and the powerful ways in which our perceptions can be reshaped. It highlights the role that stereotypes play in shaping our thoughts and interactions, and how confronting these biases, both personal and societal, can lead to a more open, equitable world. In this chapter, the focus is not just on identifying prejudice, but on destabilizing the assumptions that underpin it. The author uncovers how carefully designed interventions can alter the mental frameworks that support discriminatory thinking, ultimately helping to reduce prejudice in areas where it's most entrenched. At the heart of the discussion is the idea that stereotypes, while often based on real-world observations or historical context, can become so rigid and pervasive that they limit how we perceive individuals. These stereotypes turn people into categories, labels that overshadow their humanity, causing us to judge them based on group characteristics rather than personal traits. The dangerous consequence of this is that people are often judged not for who they are, but for who they are assumed to be based on superficial characteristics like race, gender, or background. The challenge lies in recognizing that these stereotypes are not static truths, but social constructs that can be destabilized if we approach them thoughtfully. One of the most striking examples used in the chapter is a story from the world of baseball. The author recounts a rivalry between two legendary baseball teams, the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. For decades, these teams had a fierce, almost mythical rivalry, one that extended beyond the players to the fan bases, to the cultural identities of the cities themselves. The prejudices in play were not just about baseball, but about identity, heritage, and belonging. Red Sox fans and Yankees fans embodied different worldviews, with each side holding on to stereotypes about the other. These long-standing biases were so deeply ingrained that they were passed down through generations, feeding the hatred between the two teams and their supporters. The chapter uses this example to illustrate how long-standing prejudices are sustained and amplified by cultural narratives. When individuals or groups are repeatedly exposed to these narratives, the stereotypes become normalized, accepted as truths rather than challenged assumptions. But what's most compelling about the chapter is the idea that when stereotypes are destabilized, when we introduce uncertainty into the narrative, they lose their power. This doesn't mean eradicating the history or identity of a group, but it means shifting the focus from rigid group characteristics to the nuance and complexity of individual experience. One of the most effective ways to destabilize stereotypes is through counter-stereotypic examples, instances that defy the typical narrative. In the case of the Red Sox and Yankees rivalry, a key moment in the story involves a shift in how the players themselves began to see each other, not just as representatives of their respective teams, but as individuals with shared human experiences. The breaking of this stereotype was not the result of a single event, but rather a gradual process of seeing the other in a new light. When we encounter examples that challenge our preconceived notions, whether it's a highly skilled player from a traditionally despised team or a successful woman in a male-dominated field, it forces us to question the assumptions we've held about entire groups of people. These counter-stereotypic examples show us that reality is more nuanced than the categories we've created, and they create cognitive dissonance that makes it harder to maintain rigid stereotypes. The author also discusses how personal connection plays a crucial role in this process of destabilization. When we get to know people personally, rather than as representatives of a particular race, religion, or culture, it becomes more difficult to maintain prejudices. This is because humanizing someone changes the narrative. Instead of seeing them through the lens of a stereotype, we begin to see them as a unique individual with their own story, struggles, and aspirations. Personal interactions disrupt the comfort of categorizing people, and the more we engage with people from different backgrounds, the more likely we are to see past the stereotypes that keep us divided. This is one of the key points in the chapter. Personal contact reduces prejudice by providing us with opportunities to reevaluate our assumptions. Another important tool explored in this chapter is the power of self-reflection in combating prejudice. Prejudices often operate at an unconscious level, and many people may not be aware of the biases they carry. The chapter emphasizes that one of the most effective ways to combat stereotypes is by encouraging individuals to reflect on their own biases. This means taking the time to consider why we hold certain beliefs and whether they are truly based on evidence or simply inherited from society. Self-reflection helps us confront the assumptions that guide our thinking, leading to more thoughtful, intentional behavior. This concept of destabilizing stereotypes doesn't just apply to individuals, but also to organizations and societies. One of the most powerful examples provided is in the context of the workplace. Diversity initiatives and inclusive hiring practices are often seen as ways to counteract discrimination, but they are most effective when they also involve changing the underlying narratives that sustain bias. Organizations that actively promote diversity, through mentorship programs, cross-team collaboration, and a commitment to inclusion, are not just making superficial changes. They are, in effect, creating environments where counter-stereotypic examples can flourish, making it harder for entrenched biases to take hold. As more diverse individuals rise to leadership positions, for example, they challenge the stereotypical image of who belongs at the top, destabilizing old narratives about race, gender, or class. The chapter also touches on how cultural shifts can further promote this process of destabilization. As societal values evolve and change, so too can the stories we tell about different groups. Media, art, literature, and education all play significant roles in reshaping the narratives that support stereotypes. When we are exposed to more inclusive, diverse representations of people, it helps to break down the simplistic, harmful stereotypes that have historically defined certain groups. In conclusion, this chapter argues that stereotypes are not immutable truths, but social constructs that can be destabilized through humanization, counter-stereotypic examples, personal connection, and self-reflection. The power to change our prejudices lies not just in correcting misinformation, but in challenging the underlying beliefs and narratives that shape how we view others. By breaking down these stereotypes, whether in the world of sports, the workplace, or our daily interactions, we can create a more inclusive, empathetic world where people are judged for who they truly are, not for the labels society has placed upon them. Chapter 7, Vaccine Whisperers and Mild-Mannered Interrogators. In this chapter, the focus is on one of the most challenging aspects of human interaction, changing people's minds. More specifically, it explores how to influence beliefs in a way that is respectful, non-confrontational, and ultimately more effective. The chapter draws on real-world examples, from vaccine hesitancy to criminal interrogations, to reveal how a gentle, empathetic approach can persuade people to reconsider long-held convictions and make more informed decisions. The author introduces the concept of the mild-mannered interrogator, a figure who uses a calm, non-judgmental approach to guide others toward rethinking their beliefs or behaviors. This is in stark contrast to the traditional image of the forceful, aggressive interrogator, who uses pressure and intimidation to break a person down. The power of the mild-mannered interrogator lies in their ability to create an atmosphere of trust and respect, where the person being questioned feels safe enough to express their thoughts and challenge their own assumptions. It's not about pushing an agenda, but about creating a space where the person can arrive at their own conclusions, free from fear or defensive posturing. The chapter contrasts two approaches to changing minds. One is rooted in direct confrontation, arguing, debating, and attempting to overpower the other person's view. This method can be effective in some situations, but often leads to resistance, especially when the person being confronted feels their identity or values are under attack. The second approach, and the one advocated in this chapter, is the more subtle art of persuasion. Rather than trying to force someone to change their mind, the goal is to plant a seed of doubt or curiosity. By asking open-ended questions, listening carefully, and showing empathy, the mild-mannered interrogator opens the door for individuals to reconsider their beliefs on their own terms. This idea is explored through the lens of vaccine hesitancy, an issue that has become increasingly relevant in recent years. The author draws on the work of vaccine whisperers, individuals who have had success in persuading hesitant people to get vaccinated, not by pushing facts or statistics, but by gently guiding them toward a change in mindset. These whisperers approach vaccine-hesitant individuals with empathy, asking questions to understand their fears and concerns, rather than immediately launching into a rebuttal of their beliefs. They acknowledge the uncertainty people feel and create a safe environment where the person feels comfortable reconsidering their stance. By building trust and offering information in a non-confrontational way, vaccine whisperers allow the person to come to the decision on their own, making it more likely they will accept the vaccine. This process is known as motivational interviewing, a technique often used by healthcare professionals to help patients change behaviors, such as quitting smoking or losing weight. The core of motivational interviewing is the idea that people are more likely to change if they feel that the decision is their own. Rather than telling someone what they should do, the interviewer asks thought-provoking questions that help the person examine their own reasons for holding on to their beliefs. This method works by fostering an internal dialogue, one where the individual reflects on their own motivations and values, leading them to make decisions that align with their true desires and goals. One key lesson from this chapter is the importance of listening. In the case of vaccine hesitancy, many people resist vaccines because they feel their concerns are not being heard. When someone feels ignored or dismissed, they often become more entrenched in their beliefs. However, by taking the time to listen carefully to someone's concerns, you signal that their perspective matters. This can reduce defensiveness and create an opening for productive dialogue. Listening doesn't mean agreeing with everything someone says, but it does mean respecting their point of view and creating space for them to express their feelings. The chapter also explores how asking questions, rather than making statements, can be a powerful tool in persuading others. People are more likely to change their minds when they arrive at a conclusion on their own, rather than being told what to believe. This is why the technique of asking open-ended questions is so effective. Instead of saying, vaccines are safe and you should get one, a more effective approach might be to ask, what concerns do you have about the vaccine? Or, what information would help you feel more comfortable? These questions open up a space for conversation, allowing the person to express their concerns and leading them to reflect on the reasons behind their beliefs. By helping them explore these reasons, you can create an environment in which they feel empowered to change their perspective. The concept of cognitive dissonance is also introduced in this chapter as a powerful force in changing people's minds. Cognitive dissonance occurs when someone's beliefs and behaviors are in conflict, creating a sense of discomfort or tension. This discomfort often leads people to change their beliefs or behaviors in order to restore harmony. The mild-mannered interrogator doesn't directly challenge someone's beliefs, but instead encourages them to consider contradictions or inconsistencies in their own thinking. By gently guiding them toward recognizing these contradictions, the interrogator helps the person experience cognitive dissonance, which can lead to a shift in their perspective. One fascinating section of the chapter looks at the role of humility in changing minds. The most effective persuaders don't act like they have all the answers. Instead, they approach conversations with humility, acknowledging that they don't know everything and are open to learning from others. This approach fosters a sense of collaboration rather than confrontation, making it more likely that the person will be open to new ideas. Humility creates an atmosphere of mutual respect, which is essential when trying to change someone's beliefs, especially if those beliefs are tied to their identity. The chapter concludes by highlighting the power of patience in the process of persuasion. Changing someone's mind is rarely a quick or easy process. It takes time, effort, and most importantly, persistence. People are unlikely to change their beliefs overnight, but with the right approach, they may be open to considering new perspectives over time. The key is to avoid rushing the process, to give people the space to reflect and come to their own conclusions, and to remain supportive and empathetic throughout the journey. In summary, this chapter emphasizes that persuasion is not about force, but about empathy, humility, and thoughtful inquiry. Whether it's convincing someone to get vaccinated or guiding a person through a difficult decision, the most effective approach is one that respects the other person's autonomy while creating a space for reflection. By asking the right questions, listening actively, and presenting information in a non-confrontational way, we can help others re-examine their beliefs and make more informed, thoughtful decisions. The gentle art of persuasion is not about winning an argument. It's about guiding people toward the truth in a way that makes them feel heard, respected, and empowered. Chapter 8, Charged Conversations, Depolarizing Our Divided Discussions. In this chapter, the focus shifts to one of the most urgent challenges of our time: how to engage in meaningful conversations across deep divides. Whether it's political, social, or cultural, many of us find ourselves increasingly entrenched in polarizing debates that seem to go nowhere. Instead of fostering understanding, these conversations often escalate into conflict, alienating individuals and reinforcing existing biases. This chapter offers an insightful exploration of how we can depolarize these charged discussions, creating opportunities for real dialogue that can bridge divides rather than widen them. The chapter opens with a stark observation about the current state of many discussions. They are emotionally charged and heavily polarized. People tend to cluster around groups that echo their own views. And when they encounter someone with opposing opinions, it often leads to heated arguments. Instead of using these moments as opportunities for growth and understanding, people become defensive, and the conversation devolves into a battleground. But what if there was a way to turn these contentious conversations into productive exchanges, where both sides could actually walk away with a deeper understanding of the other's perspective? The author introduces the concept of cognitive empathy, which is not simply understanding someone's viewpoint, but truly trying to see the world through their eyes, grasping the emotions and experiences that shape their beliefs. Cognitive empathy is what allows us to approach disagreements with a sense of curiosity rather than judgment. When we actively listen with the intent to understand, not to rebut or counter, something remarkable happens. People are often more willing to share their true thoughts when they feel heard, and as a result, we can break down the defensive walls that make discussions feel like zero-sum games. The key to depolarizing a conversation is to shift the tone from adversarial to collaborative. Instead of treating the other person as an enemy to be defeated, we should view them as a partner in a mutual search for truth. One powerful technique to do this is by using the principle of reframing. Reframing involves presenting the discussion in a way that emphasizes shared goals and common ground. For example, instead of saying, "You're wrong, and here's why," we can frame the conversation around shared values. "I understand that we both care about X, but I see it differently, and I'd like to explain why." This subtle shift in language creates a more cooperative environment and encourages curiosity rather than defensiveness. The chapter also explores the idea of motivational interviewing as a tool for depolarization. Originally developed for counseling, this technique can be adapted to everyday conversations. The goal of motivational interviewing is not to change someone's mind on the spot, but to help them explore their own motivations and thoughts. In polarized conversations, we tend to push for an immediate change in the other person's beliefs. However, the more effective approach is to ask open-ended questions that prompt reflection. For example, instead of saying, "Don't you see how dangerous that belief is?" a more effective approach would be, "What led you to feel that way?" By gently nudging someone to think about the origins and reasons behind their beliefs, we invite them to explore their assumptions without feeling attacked. This soft, respectful approach encourages introspection, creating space for new perspectives to emerge. Another important concept discussed is the role of identity in polarization. People's beliefs are often closely tied to their identity, and when their views are challenged, it can feel like an attack on who they are as a person. This is particularly evident in political or cultural debates, where being on the right or wrong side can feel like a matter of moral righteousness. The chapter argues that by recognizing the deep connection between identity and belief, we can shift our approach to conversations. Instead of criticizing or belittling someone's views, we should aim to engage with their values and concerns, showing them that we understand what's at stake for them emotionally. When we approach someone as a person with valid fears, hopes, and aspirations, not just as a representative of a particular viewpoint, we create a space where mutual respect and understanding can flourish. One of the most powerful techniques for depolarizing conversations involves creating shared narratives. Often, when people disagree, it's because they are telling different stories about the world. By finding common ground in those narratives and expanding the scope of the story, we can bridge divides. For instance, instead of framing an issue as us versus them, we can look for ways in which both sides are invested in the same goal. For example, in the case of climate change, a conversation framed around shared values of health, economic prosperity, and future generations can help both sides see that they have more in common than they originally thought, even if they disagree on specific solutions. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of listening, not just hearing the words, but actively trying to understand the emotions and motivations behind them. It's easy to get caught up in our own perspective, but by truly listening, we can understand what drives the other person's beliefs. The more we listen, the more we learn not just about their ideas, but about their experiences, fears, and hopes. This deeper understanding can guide us toward more compassionate, respectful conversations, and over time, help shift entrenched views. The author uses an interesting case study to illustrate the power of effective communication. In one example, a politician who had been publicly vilified for his stance on a controversial issue was able to turn his image around, not by doubling down on his beliefs, but by engaging with his critics in a non-confrontational way. He listened to their concerns, validated their feelings, and reframed the conversation around shared values. Over time, this approach not only softened his critics' stance, but also invited more nuanced discussions around the issue. The key takeaway here is that the depolarization isn't about winning the argument. It's about creating a space for understanding and growth. In conclusion, the chapter offers valuable strategies for managing polarizing conversations. By focusing on cognitive empathy, reframing, motivational interviewing, and building shared narratives, we can depolarize even the most charged discussions. The key is to approach others with respect, curiosity, and a willingness to understand, rather than with the goal of winning or proving someone wrong. When we take the time to truly listen and engage in a spirit of collaboration, we create an environment where dialogue can flourish and divisions can begin to heal. In a world where polarization often seems insurmountable, these approaches offer hope for finding common ground and building bridges across even the deepest divides. Chapter 9: Rewriting the Textbook. Teaching students to question knowledge. In a world where information is rapidly evolving, the importance of questioning knowledge, instead of merely absorbing it, is more crucial than ever. This chapter addresses a profound shift in the way education should function, especially in the context of a rapidly changing, complex world. It challenges traditional methods of teaching that emphasize memorization and conformity, advocating instead for a more dynamic, critical approach that empowers students not just to learn, but to question, engage, and evolve their thinking. The chapter opens by discussing the common approach to education, where students are often treated as receptacles of knowledge rather than active participants in the creation of that knowledge. From an early age, we are taught to accept facts, dates, definitions, and formulas as absolute truths. While foundational knowledge is important, this approach can stifle curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking. Students are rarely encouraged to challenge what they are taught or to view knowledge as something fluid, open to interpretation and refinement. Instead, they are taught to memorize the right answers, with little regard for the process of questioning and understanding those answers. This chapter emphasizes a radically different model of education, one where students are not passive consumers of information, but active creators of knowledge. The goal is not just to teach what is known, but to teach how to think, to question, and to engage in a process of intellectual exploration. It's about shifting the focus from learning the right answers to asking the right questions, and being open to the possibility that our knowledge may be incomplete, evolving, or even wrong. The act of questioning becomes as important as the facts themselves. This method empowers students to become more adaptable and resilient thinkers, capable of navigating the uncertainties and complexities of the real world. A central theme of this chapter is the power of intellectual humility. True learning happens when we acknowledge the limits of our own knowledge and remain open to being challenged. The chapter points out that many students, and even some teachers, fall into the trap of thinking that knowledge is a static, fixed set of facts. In this mindset, there is no room for growth or change, and people become resistant to new ideas or contrary evidence. But if we can cultivate intellectual humility, we open ourselves to a deeper, more transformative kind of learning. We come to see that knowledge is not a set of immutable truths, but a collection of ideas that are constantly tested, refined, and sometimes overturned. By teaching students to embrace uncertainty and doubt, we encourage them to engage in an ongoing process of discovery and growth. One of the most striking aspects of this chapter is the focus on the importance of critical thinking in education. The ability to analyze, evaluate, and question ideas is one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop. Yet it is often neglected in traditional schooling systems. Critical thinking doesn't just involve identifying flaws in others' arguments. It also means recognizing the biases and assumptions that shape our own thinking. The chapter encourages educators to create environments where students can actively practice questioning, experimenting, and revising their ideas. Rather than simply presenting information for students to memorize, teachers are encouraged to foster environments where students are given opportunities to engage with ideas critically and form their own conclusions. The goal is to help students recognize that knowledge is not an unchangeable set of facts, but a living, breathing thing that evolves over time. The chapter also delves into the limitations of expertise. While experts are undoubtedly valuable sources of knowledge, the chapter highlights the fact that expertise doesn't guarantee that someone has all the answers. In fact, experts are often the ones most susceptible to overconfidence, a psychological bias that leads people to believe that they know more than they actually do. This overconfidence can hinder progress, as experts may be less likely to challenge their own assumptions or consider alternative viewpoints. By encouraging students to question even the conclusions of experts, the chapter advocates for a more democratic and inclusive approach to learning, where everyone's ideas are subject to scrutiny and no one is above questioning. The author draws on examples from both historical and contemporary settings to illustrate the power of critical thinking in action. One notable example is the story of scientists who, in the face of overwhelming evidence, rejected the theory of heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. The resistance to this idea wasn't due to a lack of evidence, but rather because it fundamentally challenged the established understanding of the universe. This historical example underscores the danger of thinking that what we know today is the final word. Even the most well-established ideas are subject to change. And the process of rethinking what we know is an essential part of intellectual progress. Additionally, the chapter emphasizes the importance of cultivating curiosity in students. Curiosity is the engine of learning, and it's something that can be nurtured in the classroom. The author suggests that one of the best ways to encourage curiosity is to frame learning as an exploration, rather than a race to memorize facts. Instead of simply testing students on what they know, educators can challenge them with open-ended questions that require them to think critically and explore different perspectives. By doing so, we not only help students retain information better, but we also give them the tools to continue learning long after they leave the classroom. One interesting point made in the chapter is the idea that error is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Mistakes are an inevitable part of the learning process, and instead of punishing students for getting things wrong, we should encourage them to learn from their errors. Failure is a vital component of intellectual growth, as it forces us to question our assumptions and adjust our thinking. When students understand that making mistakes is part of the journey, they become more comfortable with uncertainty and more willing to explore new ideas. The chapter concludes with a powerful call to action for educators, parents, and leaders alike. If we want to prepare future generations for a world that is constantly changing, we must teach them not just to absorb information, but to challenge it. We must foster intellectual curiosity, humility, and the courage to question even the most deeply held beliefs. This approach to learning will not only equip students with the skills they need to thrive in an uncertain world, but it will also encourage them to become lifelong learners, always seeking to better understand the world around them. In essence, this chapter is a clarion call to rethink how we teach and how we learn. By moving away from the traditional, rigid approach to education and embracing a mindset of questioning, critical thinking, and intellectual humility, we can create a generation of thinkers who are equipped to tackle the challenges of the future with creativity, adaptability, and confidence. Rewriting the textbook, then, is not just about updating the content, it's about rewriting the very process of learning itself. Chapter 10. That's not the way we've always done it. Building cultures of learning at work. In this chapter, the focus shifts to the workplace, where cultures of learning and adaptability are often stifled by rigid systems, outdated practices, and the comfort of familiarity. The chapter challenges the traditional mindset of "we've always done it this way," urging organizations and leaders to rethink how they cultivate environments that foster growth, curiosity, and the willingness to adapt to new ideas. It emphasizes the importance of creating a work culture where learning is not just a goal, but a fundamental value woven into the fabric of daily operations. By shifting the mindset from static certainty to dynamic curiosity, organizations can not only enhance their performance, but also future-proof themselves against an unpredictable and rapidly changing world. The chapter begins by highlighting a critical tension that exists in many organizations today: the tension between complacency and progress. Many businesses and leaders are trapped in established patterns of thinking, relying on processes that have always worked, or sticking to traditional norms because they seem safer and more familiar. But as the world becomes more complex and the pace of change accelerates, these outdated models become liabilities. The chapter stresses that maintaining a "this is the way we've always done it" attitude is a recipe for stagnation, leading to missed opportunities, slower innovation, and a decline in competitiveness. The true key to thriving in a rapidly evolving world is building a culture that values learning and growth over comfort and tradition. The chapter introduces the concept of a learning culture, a work environment where continuous learning is encouraged, valued, and rewarded at all levels. Such a culture fosters an openness to new ideas, new ways of doing things, and new ways of thinking. It shifts away from the old paradigm of expertise as the end goal, recognizing instead that the ability to remain flexible, adaptive, and curious is just as important, if not more so, than possessing fixed knowledge. In such a culture, employees are empowered to ask questions, experiment, and push boundaries, all while having the confidence that learning and growth are prioritized over rigid performance metrics. A major obstacle to fostering a learning culture in many organizations is the tendency to reward certainty and punish mistakes. Employees often feel that their value is determined by how much they know or how much they can get right. This leads to a reluctance to speak up, challenge the status quo, or admit when they don't know something. The fear of failure, of being seen as incompetent, inhibits risk-taking and stifles innovation. To truly build a learning culture, however, organizations must flip this paradigm on its head. Rather than punishing failure, it's important to celebrate mistakes as opportunities for growth. Leaders should foster an environment where employees feel safe to experiment, share new ideas, and learn from both successes and failures. When mistakes are treated as learning moments rather than setbacks, creativity flourishes, and employees become more willing to embrace challenges. The chapter goes on to highlight the importance of leadership in shaping a culture of learning. Leaders who themselves exhibit curiosity and a willingness to learn create an environment where learning is not only tolerated, but expected. Instead of positioning themselves as the final authorities with all the answers, leaders should see themselves as learners too, modeling intellectual humility. This vulnerability helps dismantle hierarchies that often stifle open communication. A leader who is willing to admit they don't know everything sets the tone for others to feel comfortable doing the same. This creates an atmosphere where collaboration and diverse perspectives are encouraged. The chapter encourages leaders to embrace a growth mindset, not just for themselves, but for their teams as well. It's about adopting the belief that intelligence and ability aren't fixed traits, but can be developed through effort, feedback, and learning. An important aspect of building a learning culture is the continuous development of employees. Rather than seeing training as a one-time event or a checkbox to tick, the chapter stresses the need for ongoing education and development that supports long-term growth. This can include formal programs like workshops and courses, but also informal avenues such as mentorship, feedback sessions, and the fostering of networks that encourage knowledge exchange. Creating spaces where employees can learn from one another and from external sources broadens the collective intelligence of the organization, helping it stay innovative and adaptable in a fast-moving world. The chapter also explores the power of feedback in building a learning culture. Feedback, when given constructively, can be one of the most powerful tools for growth. However, in many workplaces, feedback is either ignored or delivered in ways that feel punitive, discouraging employees from embracing it. To create a culture of learning, feedback should be approached as a valuable source of insight, aimed at helping individuals and teams improve and refine their approaches. It should be specific, actionable, and framed in a way that encourages improvement rather than shame. Leaders should model how to give and receive feedback effectively, creating a two-way street where open communication becomes part of the everyday work process. The chapter stresses the importance of celebrating learning milestones. In many organizations, success is measured by the end result, whether a project is completed on time or whether sales targets are hit. But learning and progress are often overlooked. Recognizing learning achievements, even small ones, can help reinforce the value of curiosity and intellectual growth. Celebrating employees who take risks, ask questions, and challenge established norms can set a powerful example for the rest of the organization. This not only motivates individuals, but also shifts the organizational culture toward one where learning is embedded in every aspect of the work process. Additionally, diversity of thought plays a critical role in fostering a culture of learning. The chapter emphasizes that in order for organizations to truly innovate and grow, they must actively seek out diverse perspectives and be open to challenging their own assumptions. When teams are composed of people with different experiences, backgrounds, and viewpoints, they are more likely to come up with creative solutions and identify blind spots that might otherwise be missed. Encouraging open, respectful debate and dialogue helps to ensure that ideas are rigorously tested and refined, creating a stronger, more adaptable organization. In conclusion, the chapter makes a powerful case for transforming workplaces into environments that prioritize learning, curiosity, and adaptability. Building a culture of learning requires leaders to model intellectual humility, embrace failure as a learning opportunity, foster continuous development, and actively encourage diversity of thought. By shifting away from traditional, rigid ways of thinking, organizations can break free from stagnation and position themselves to thrive in an increasingly complex and fast-moving world. In a culture where learning is at the forefront, employees are empowered to question assumptions, seek new knowledge, and continuously innovate. This dynamic environment becomes not only a source of competitive advantage, but also a place where individuals can grow, contribute meaningfully, and be engaged in the process of lifelong learning. Chapter 11: Escaping Tunnel Vision, Reconsidering Best-Laid Career and Life Plans. As we approach the final chapter of this transformative book, we are encouraged to confront one of the most fundamental aspects of life: the career and life plans we've worked so hard to build. This chapter urges us to break free from the confines of our tunnel vision, the narrow mindset that often locks us into predetermined paths and rigid expectations. While it is natural to have a vision for our future, the chapter highlights that our ability to rethink, revise, and even completely pivot is essential to living a fulfilling and successful life, both professionally and personally. The final chapter challenges the idea that the trajectory of our lives is set in stone, urging us to embrace the fluidity of change and consider that sometimes the best-laid plans can lead to unexpected, yet rewarding, destinations. The chapter opens with a look at the nature of career and life planning. From a young age, many of us are conditioned to make plans, decisions about our careers, relationships, and personal ambitions that we believe will guide us toward success. These plans often feel like a blueprint for life, with clear goals, steps, and a timeline for achievement. But as we grow, these plans can begin to feel restrictive, as if we are bound to a fixed narrative. Our past choices and experiences shape our present direction, but the chapter argues that we should not let our past define our future. Just because we've committed to a particular path doesn't mean it's the only path that will lead to fulfillment. In fact, being too rigid in our career or life planning can prevent us from seizing new opportunities that may be more aligned with our evolving interests and passions. The chapter then shifts focus to the concept of tunnel vision, which refers to a mindset where we become fixated on a single goal, strategy, or outcome to the point where we miss out on other possibilities. Tunnel vision in our careers or life plans can be paralyzing, as it can prevent us from questioning whether our current trajectory still aligns with who we are and what we truly want. We may continue down a path simply because it's what we've always envisioned, without considering that our desires, values, or circumstances may have changed. This tendency to lock ourselves into a particular narrative can limit our potential and keep us from adapting to new circumstances. The chapter emphasizes that flexibility is not just an advantage, but a necessity in today's fast-paced, ever-changing world. The most successful individuals are not those who have mapped out every step of their journey and stuck to it rigidly. Rather, they are the ones who have been able to adapt, revise their plans, and take detours when necessary. When we allow ourselves to question our assumptions and entertain alternative paths, we create opportunities for growth, learning, and fulfillment that we may never have considered before. The key to escaping tunnel vision, the chapter argues, is developing a mindset of curiosity and openness. This mindset allows us to recognize when we're holding on to outdated plans or ideas simply out of habit or fear of the unknown. It's about being willing to reevaluate and change course when circumstances change or when we discover new passions, talents, or interests. It requires us to be honest with ourselves and ask hard questions. Is this career path still right for me? Do my personal goals align with who I am becoming, or are they based on who I once was? This willingness to ask such questions opens the door to personal reinvention. One of the most profound points in this chapter is the idea that our careers and life plans should be viewed as experiments, not fixed destinations. Just as scientific experiments involve testing hypotheses, observing outcomes, and making adjustments based on new information, our careers and personal lives should be approached with the same mindset. Instead of locking ourselves into a rigid plan, we should be open to experimenting with different roles, projects, or directions, learning from the results, and adjusting our course as needed. This mindset allows us to stay engaged in the process of growth and discovery, rather than viewing life as a series of predetermined steps to follow. The chapter also addresses the fear of failure that often accompanies the idea of changing course. Many people resist rethinking their career or life plans because they fear that they'll be perceived as failures or that they've invested too much time and energy into their current path to change. This fear can be paralyzing and prevent us from taking risks that could ultimately lead to greater fulfillment. But as the chapter reminds us, failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the process. By allowing ourselves the freedom to fail, we open up opportunities to learn, adapt, and grow in ways we may never have anticipated. Embracing failure as a stepping stone toward success frees us from the limitations of tunnel vision and allows us to pursue paths that align with our evolving desires and aspirations. A key theme throughout this chapter is the idea that reinvention is not a sign of failure, but of courage and growth. In a world where career paths are no longer linear and life choices are more fluid, the ability to reinvent ourselves, whether through a career pivot, a personal transformation, or a change in values, is a powerful skill. The chapter provides examples of individuals who have made bold shifts in their careers or life directions and found immense satisfaction in doing so. These stories serve as powerful reminders that it is never too late to change your mind, try something new, or redefine what success means. The author also highlights the importance of self-reflection in this process of reinvention. To truly know whether we are on the right path, we must take time to reflect on our experiences, values, and goals. It is only through deep introspection that we can identify when we've outgrown old plans or when we are being held back by fear, pride, or insecurity. The chapter encourages readers to regularly check in with themselves, to question whether their actions align with their true desires, and to make adjustments as needed. The final takeaway from this chapter is a call to embrace uncertainty. As much as we might want certainty in our careers and life plans, the reality is that uncertainty is a constant. The world changes, industries evolve, and we change as individuals. Instead of fearing the unknown, we should embrace it, understanding that uncertainty creates the space for growth, innovation, and new possibilities. By accepting that our career and life plans are not fixed, but rather flexible and evolving, we free ourselves from the constraints of tunnel vision and open ourselves up to a world of endless possibilities. As the last chapter of the book, this section leaves readers with a powerful message. Life is a journey of continual learning, growth, and reinvention. It encourages us to remain open to new opportunities, to question our assumptions, and to make bold changes when necessary. By doing so, we unlock the potential for a richer, more fulfilling life, one that is defined not by rigid plans, but by a mindset of curiosity, adaptability, and lifelong learning. It's a call to step into the unknown with confidence, knowing that the best way to plan for the future is to remain flexible and open to the unexpected paths that may lead us to our greatest successes and discoveries. Thanks for spending time with us at the Book Lounge. If this episode on Think Again sparked any new thoughts or takeaways for you, drop a comment below and let me know what resonated most. I'd love to hear what stood out and even what you'd like me to cover next. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss our next discussion. And before you go, grab your free book summary and actionable workbook. Links are in the description. These resources will help you get even more out of what you've just listened to. See you in the next one.